The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Amelia Zimmerman stepped down onto the weathered planks of Sheridan, Wyoming's Main Street, clutching a worn leather satchel that held everything she owned and a heart so heavy it threatened to drag her straight through the earth. The year was 1876, and the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her black mourning dress, making the fabric cling to her thin frame as she surveyed the frontier town that would either become her salvation or her grave. She had nowhere else to go. 3 months ago, typhoid had swept through her small Illinois farming community and taken her husband of 2 years, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay and in-laws who blamed her for surviving when their son had not. At 23, Amelia had already learned that grief was a peculiar companion, sometimes quiet as a whisper, other times roaring like a wounded animal in her chest during the darkest hours before dawn. The telegram from her late mother's cousin, Beatrice, had arrived like a lifeline. "Come west. I have a boarding house. You can work here, make a fresh start." It wasn't much, but it was more than she had in Illinois, where every street corner held memories of Thomas. Every familiar face carried pity in their eyes that made her want to scream. Amelia adjusted the small hat pinned to her auburn hair and started walking down the dusty street, searching for the address Beatrice had provided. Sheridan was larger than she'd expected, bustling with miners, cattlemen, and opportunists, drawn by the promise of gold in the nearby hills and rich grazing land in the valleys. The buildings were a mixture of rough-hewn lumber and newer brick structures, signs of a town trying to shake off its wild roots and become something respectable. She was so focused on reading the numbers painted on storefronts that she didn't notice the runaway horse until someone grabbed her around the waist and hauled her backward with such force that her hat went flying. They tumbled together onto the wooden walkway as the terrified mare thundered past, eyes rolling white, dragging a broken hitching post behind her. Amelia found herself pressed against a solid chest, strong arms still wrapped protectively around her middle, her heart hammering from shock. She could feel the stranger's own heart beating rapidly against her back. "Are you hurt, madam?" The voice was deep, edged with concern and unmistakably Texan. She shook her head, unable to find her voice for a moment as he helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness for someone who had just tackled her like a runaway steer. When she finally turned to face her rescuer, she found herself looking up into the most striking pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face that was all strong angles and honest planes. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. "I'm fine," she managed, brushing dust from her dress with trembling hands. "Thank you. That was you could have been hurt yourself. Better me than you, madam." He retrieved her hat from where it had landed near a water trough, carefully brushing it off before handing it back to her. "That mare's been spooked half the afternoon. Her owner's drunk as a skunk down at the Silver Dollar, and nobody's been able to catch her yet." Amelia took the hat, acutely aware that they were drawing stares from passers-by. A proper widow shouldn't be engaging in conversation with strange men, but then again, a proper widow wouldn't have fled halfway across the country to escape her husband's memory either. "I'm grateful nonetheless, Mr. Yates Zimmerman." He touched the brim of his hat, then froze, his eyes widening slightly as he seemed to process what he'd just said. Did you say your name already?" "No, but it's Zimmerman as well. Amelia Zimmerman." She saw the confusion flicker across his face and quickly added, "By marriage. I'm from Illinois originally." "Well, I'll be." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her pulse skip in a way that brought instant guilt flooding through her. My people are from Missouri. Must be we're distant relations somewhere back down the line. Must be, she echoed faintly, clutching her satchel tighter against her chest like a shield. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the busy street, the shouts of men loading freight wagons, the tinny music drifting from a nearby saloon. Yates shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say something more but not quite knowing what. His gaze kept dropping to the black dress, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression, followed by sympathy that made her want to run. "I should let you get on with your business," he said finally, his voice gentler now. "But if you need anything while you're in Sheridan, I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Most folks know where it is. I'm staying, actually. My cousin runs a boarding house here. Beatrice Morrison's place." Amelia nodded, surprised. "You know her?" "Madam, in a town this size, everybody knows everybody. Beatrice's place is just 2 blocks down and 1 over. Can't miss it, big white house with green shutters and a porch that wraps clear around." He pointed in the direction she needed to go, then hesitated again. "I could walk you there if you'd like. Make sure no more runaway horses come at you." She should say no, should thank him politely and go on her way. But there was something in his eyes, a kindness that didn't demand anything in return, that made her nod before she could think better of it. They walked in silence at first, Yates keeping a respectful distance between them. He had a horseman's easy stride, comfortable in his own skin in a way Thomas never had been. Thomas had been a farmer's son, solid and dependable but always slightly uncomfortable, as if he'd been born into the wrong life. Amelia pushed the thought away. She had promised herself she would stop comparing every man she met to her dead husband. Been working at the Double R long? She asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine curiosity. 3 years now. Came up from Texas after the war ended. Well, after I was old enough to know what I was doing anyway. I was just a boy when the fighting stopped. He glanced at her. It's good country up here. Hard winters, but the land's rich and the work's honest. And what exactly do you do at this ranch? Whatever needs doing. Branding, breaking horses, mending fences, moving cattle between pastures. Right now we're preparing for the drive to market in the fall. It's good work, and Mr. Reynolds treats his men fair. They turned the corner, and the boarding house came into view exactly as Yates had described it. It was one of the nicer buildings in town, well-maintained with fresh paint and flower boxes in the windows that overflowed with bright blooms despite the summer heat. The sight of it made something loosen in Amelia's chest. This would be home now, for better or worse. "Here we are," Yates said unnecessarily, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. He seemed reluctant to leave, his hat now in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I hope you find Sheridan to your liking. It can be rough around the edges, but there are good people here." "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, and thank you again for the rescue." She extended her hand formally, and he shook it with a grip that was firm but careful, as if he was afraid she might break. She was halfway up the steps when his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Zimmerman, if you don't mind my asking, will you be staying at Beatrice's long?" Amelia turned to find him still standing there, something almost hopeful in his expression that made her heart do that traitorous skip again. "Indefinitely. I'll be working here, helping my cousin run the establishment." "Then I suppose I'll be seeing you around town." "I suppose you will." She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him back toward the main street, and tried to ignore the small voice in her head that whispered she hoped he was right. Beatrice Morrison turned out to be a force of nature packed into a 5-foot frame, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She swept Amelia into the boarding house with a flurry of questions and instructions, barely pausing for breath as she showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "You'll take your meals with the boarders," Beatrice explained, moving about the room, opening windows to let in the breeze. "Breakfast at 6, dinner at noon when the men come home, and supper at 7. You'll help with the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, and anything else that needs doing. Sunday afternoons are your own after the Sunday dinner service. Wages are room, board, and $3 a week. Fair." "More than fair," Amelia said quietly, setting her satchel on the narrow bed. "Aunt Beatrice, I can't thank you enough. I'm not your aunt, girl. I'm your mother's second cousin, which hardly makes us kin at all. But your mother was kind to me once when I needed it, and I believe in paying debts, even the ones owed to the dead." Beatrice's sharp gaze softened slightly. "Besides, you look like you could use a place where nobody knows your story or expects you to be anything but what you are right now." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "That's exactly what I need." "Good. Then we understand each other. Now wash up and come downstairs. I'll introduce you to the boarders at supper, and you can start learning the routine tomorrow." She paused at the door. "And Amelia, that black dress might be proper back in Illinois, but here it'll just make you melt in the summer heat. I've got some of my daughter's old things packed away. She married a railroad man and moved to San Francisco. Won't be needing them anymore. You're about her size." After Beatrice left, Amelia sank onto the bed and let herself take a full breath for what felt like the first time in months. The room was simple, just the bed, a small dresser, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin, and a single window that looked out over the street. But it was hers. No memories lived in these walls. No ghost of Thomas would turn every corner into a fresh wound. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging the 2 extra dresses she owned in the narrow wardrobe, setting her mother's Bible and Thomas's pocket watch on the dresser. Her fingers traced the watch's worn case, and she felt the familiar ache settle in her chest. Not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but the duller throb of loss that she was learning to carry like a stone in her pocket, always there, weighing her down but no longer crippling. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room, to Thomas, to the future they would never have. "I'm sorry, but I have to keep living." The watch ticked steadily on, indifferent to her declaration. That evening, Amelia met the boarding house residents over a supper of roasted chicken, potatoes, and green beans that Beatrice served with military efficiency. There were 6 boarders in total. 2 miners who worked claims in the hills and came to town once a month for supplies and a real bed. A young schoolteacher named Miss Patricia Hollies, who had come west from Boston. A railroad surveyor who was rarely home. An elderly prospector everyone called Cookie, though no one seemed to remember why. And a quiet clerk who worked at the general store and barely spoke above a whisper. They were curious about Amelia, but polite enough not to pry, and Beatrice's stern presence at the head of the table discouraged any inappropriate questions. The conversation flowed around her, talk of mining prospects and cattle prices, and the new church being built at the edge of town, and Amelia let it wash over her like a river, content to simply exist without having to explain herself. The next morning began before dawn. Beatrice shook her awake while stars still glittered in the black sky, and Amelia stumbled downstairs to help prepare breakfast for 8 people. Her hands remembered the rhythms of domestic work, kneading biscuit dough, frying bacon, brewing strong coffee that could strip paint. By the time the sun crested the horizon, the dining room table was laden with food, and the boarders filed in with sleepy gratitude. The days that followed blurred into a routine that was simultaneously exhausting and soothing. Amelia worked from before dawn until after dark, her hands never idle, her mind too busy with tasks to dwell on the past. She learned the particular quirks of the kitchen stove, which burner ran hot and which needed coaxing. She memorized which boarders liked sugar in their coffee and which preferred it black as sin. She scrubbed floors and beat rugs and hung laundry in the backyard where it snapped like flags in the constant wind. Beatrice was a stern taskmaster, but not unkind, and gradually, Amelia came to appreciate her cousin's gruff practicality. There were no platitudes about time healing all wounds or God's mysterious plans. Beatrice simply expected Amelia to work, to contribute, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and somehow that was more comforting than all the sympathetic words she'd endured back in Illinois. On Sunday afternoon, after the boarders had been fed their substantial midday meal and the dishes were washed and put away, Beatrice shooed Amelia out of the kitchen. "Go on, get some air. You've been cooped up in this house for a week. Go walk around town, see what we have to offer." Amelia changed into one of the dresses Beatrice had given her, a simple blue calico that was far more practical than her morning clothes, and ventured out into the summer afternoon. Sheridan was quieter on Sundays, the shops mostly closed, but there were still plenty of people on the streets, families dressed in their Sunday best walking home from church, cowboys riding in from the surrounding ranches for their one day of rest. She walked with no particular destination in mind, letting her feet carry her past the general store and the bank, the blacksmith's shop and the doctor's office. At the edge of town, she found a small cemetery on a hillside overlooking the valley, and she climbed the slope to wander among the wooden markers and simple stone monuments. So many of the graves were recent, casualties of the hard life on the frontier. Children who had died of scarlet fever or diphtheria, men killed in mining accidents or by angry cattle or from drinking bad whiskey. A few women, dead in childbirth, leaving behind husbands and motherless babies. Each grave represented a story, a grief, a family forever altered. Thomas's grave was back in Illinois, and she realized with a start that she hadn't thought about visiting it in days. The guilt came swift and sharp, but underneath it was something else, something that felt dangerously close to relief. "Afternoon, Mrs. Zimmerman." She spun around to find Yates Zimmerman standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand, looking uncertain about whether he should have intruded on her solitude. He was dressed a bit better than when she'd first met him, wearing a clean shirt and a vest, his hair combed back from his face. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, surprised by how pleased she felt to see him. "I didn't expect to run into you again so soon. I ride into town most Sundays, get a hot meal and a bath at the barber shop, check if there's any mail." He gestured vaguely toward town. "Saw you walking up here. Wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine. Just exploring my new home." She looked back at the graves, searching for something neutral to say. "It seems like a hard place to live." "Can be," he agreed, moving to stand beside her, though still maintaining a proper distance. "But it's honest. You know where you stand. The land doesn't lie to you, and neither do most of the people. If they don't like you, they'll tell you straight out. If they do, they'll stand by you when trouble comes. And does trouble come often? Often enough. But there's beauty too, if you know where to look for it." He pointed north, toward the distant mountains that rose blue and majestic against the summer sky. "Those peaks up there, they get snow that never melts even in August. And in the spring, the valleys fill up with wildflowers, millions of them, stretching far as you can see. Wild horses running free, elk herds big enough to darken the whole hillside. Stars so thick at night you'd swear you could reach up and scoop them out of the sky like water from a creek." There was something almost poetic in the way he spoke about the land, a reverence that made her see him differently. This wasn't just a rough cowboy scraping by on ranch wages. This was someone who had found his place in the world and knew how fortunate he was. "You love it here," she said quietly. "I do. It took some time to feel that way, but yes, madam, I surely do." He turned to look at her directly, those gray eyes serious. "It could be a good place for you too, Mrs. Zimmerman, if you let it." "I'm trying," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "Some days are harder than others." "That's natural. After losing your husband, I imagine," he stopped, clearly unsure if he should continue. "It's all right, you can say it. After Thomas died." Speaking the name hurt less than she'd expected. "It's been 3 months. Some days I feel like I'm finally climbing out of the dark, and other days I fall right back in. 3 months isn't very long. Long enough to know I can't spend the rest of my life looking backward." She bent to straighten a small wooden cross that had tilted in the wind. "He was a good man, my husband, kind and steady. We married because it made sense, because our families expected it. But I don't think either of us was truly in love, not the way people write about in books. Does that make me terrible? Makes you honest?" Yates's voice was gentle. "Most marriages start that way, I reckon. Practicality first, affection later if you're lucky." "Were you ever married?" "No, madam, came close once, back in Texas. But she married my best friend instead, and that was probably for the best. I'm not sure I would have made her happy." He smiled, but there was old pain in it. "They have 3 kids now, last I heard. Nice little farm. She got the life she wanted." They stood together in companionable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. Amelia felt something shift inside her, a tiny loosening of the tight knot of grief and guilt that had lived in her chest for so long. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said finally, "would you walk me back to town? I should return before Beatrice thinks I've been carried off by bandits or wild animals." "There's not much chance of that with all the people around, but I'd be happy to escort you." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked slowly down the hillside, and Yates filled the comfortable silence with stories about Sheridan, pointing out landmarks and sharing the local gossip he'd picked up. The mayor was feuding with the owner of the largest general store over whose property line extended where. The schoolteacher was being courted by 3 different men and seemed to be enjoying keeping them all in competition. A band of Cheyenne had been spotted to the east, but they were peaceful, just passing through on their way to better hunting grounds. When they reached the boarding house, Yates tipped his hat to her. "I hope you'll allow me to say hello again, Mrs. Zimmerman. It's been a genuine pleasure talking with you." The pleasure was mine. "And Mr. Zimmerman, please call me Amelia." All this formality seems silly when we share a last name, even if only by chance. His smile was slow and warm, lighting up his whole face. "Then you should call me Yates, though I'll try to remember my manners in front of others. I'd appreciate that." She watched him walk away again, and this time the voice in her head was louder, insistent. "This man could matter to you," it whispered. "If you let him." The thought terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. The summer weeks rolled by, measured in loads of laundry and batches of bread, in scrubbed floors and mended linens. Amelia settled into the rhythms of life at the boarding house, her hands growing calloused from work, her face gaining color from the brief moments spent in the sun hanging wash or tending Beatrice's small vegetable garden. Yates rode into town every Sunday like clockwork, and somehow he always found her, whether she was at the cemetery or walking the quiet streets or sitting on the boarding house porch shelling peas. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his father who had died when he was young, about learning to rope and ride from the Mexican vaqueros who worked his uncle's ranch. She found herself sharing memories of Illinois that didn't hurt quite so much in the telling. Stories of her childhood before responsibility and loss had weighted her down. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give, never asked questions that made her uncomfortable, never touched her beyond offering his arm when they walked together. But there was something building between them, patient and inexorable as the turning seasons, and they both knew it. One Sunday in late August, Yates arrived earlier than usual, leading a gentle-looking mare with a star-shaped marking on her forehead. "I thought you might like to go riding," he said, holding the reins loosely. "See some of the countryside. This is Daisy. She's the sweetest horse on the whole ranch. She practically raised me, and she won't give you any trouble." Amelia stared at the horse, then at Yates. "I don't know how to ride." "I figured as much. That's why I brought Daisy. She'll take care of you, and I'll be right beside you the whole time." He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "But only if you want to. No pressure." She should say no, should maintain the careful distance that propriety demanded. But the thought of spending a whole afternoon away from the boarding house, out in the open country Yates spoke of with such love, was too tempting to resist. "Let me tell Beatrice where I'm going." Her cousin raised an eyebrow when Amelia explained, but merely said, "Take a canteen of water and be back before dark. The decent folks will talk, but let them. Life's too short to worry about gossips." Yates helped her mount with patient instructions, his hand steadying her waist for just a moment before he swung up onto his own horse, a tall gelding named Copper. They rode slowly out of town, Yates keeping Copper to a gentle walk so Daisy would follow suit, giving Amelia time to adjust to the unfamiliar sensation of being astride a horse. At first, she was terrified, convinced she would fall with every step the mare took. But gradually, as Daisy plodded calmly along and Yates offered quiet encouragement, Amelia began to relax into the motion. They followed a well-worn trail north, leaving the town behind, and the world opened up around them in a way that took her breath away. The grasslands stretched endlessly in every direction, golden in the late summer heat, rippling like water in the constant wind. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals. In the distance, she could see dark shapes that Yates identified as cattle from the Double R Ranch, thousands of them spread across the range. The mountains rose ahead of them, impossibly huge and ancient, their peaks still touched with snow even in August, just as he had promised. "It's beautiful," she breathed, and even that seemed inadequate. "Wait until we get to the creek," Yates said, pleasure evident in his voice. They rode for another half-hour before the land dipped into a shallow valley where a line of cottonwood trees marked the path of running water. Yates dismounted first, then helped Amelia down, his hands on her waist again, and this time he didn't let go immediately. They stood close together, and she could see the question in his eyes, the wanting that he was trying so hard to keep respectful. "Amelia," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart kicked into a gallop. "All right. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it's meant a great deal to me, more than I probably have any right to say given your circumstances." He took a breath, his hand still resting lightly on her waist. "But I can't keep pretending I'm just a friendly acquaintance. I care about you. More than I should, maybe. And I want you to know that if you need more time, if you're not ready for anything beyond friendship, I'll understand. I'll wait as long as you need. But I couldn't go another day without being honest about how I feel." The words hung between them, brave and terrifying in their honesty. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to hope. I care about you too, she whispered. And that scares me, Yates. Thomas has only been gone 3 months. What kind of wife am I if I've already moved on? What does that say about me? It says you're alive. It says you're strong enough to keep going instead of burying yourself in grief. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her waist, and it says that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be happy again. I don't know if I remember how to be happy. Then let me help you learn. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his touch feather light, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Let me carry some of that grief for you, Amelia. You don't have to shoulder it all alone. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes against the tears that finally spilled over. I don't want to forget him. You won't. He'll always be part of your story, but that doesn't mean your story has to end with him. Yates brushed away her tears with his thumb. Say yes, say you'll give us a chance. We'll go as slow as you need. When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache in an entirely different way than grief. This was the ache of new beginnings, of taking a risk, of reaching for something beautiful even when you were terrified of losing it. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I want to try, he smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then, moving with careful deliberation, giving her every chance to change her mind, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like kissing Thomas. Thomas had been dutiful, perfunctory, affection expressed because it was expected. This was something else entirely. Yates kissed her like she was precious, like he wanted to memorize the feel of her lips against his, like he would gladly spend the rest of his life right here if she asked him to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Amelia felt something inside her unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. It was permission to move forward, permission to want something for herself again, permission to hope. Well, Yates said, his voice rough with emotion, I've been wanting to do that for weeks. She laughed, surprising herself. Only weeks. Maybe since the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking like you were ready to face down the whole wild world with nothing but a worn satchel and sheer determination. They walked hand in hand to the creek, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Yates spread out a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag, and they sat together in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch. Nothing huge, just enough land to run a decent herd and build a house that would stand for generations. She confessed that she'd always wanted to learn to read music, to play the piano that had stood silent in her parents' parlor because there was never money for lessons. There's a piano at the church, Yates said thoughtfully. I bet Reverend Michaels would let you practice on it if you asked. And Miss Holly's your fellow boarder, she plays. She might be willing to teach you. You think so? Won't know unless you ask. He grinned at her. Besides, you've spent the last 3 months hiding away, working yourself to the bone. It's time you started living again, not just surviving. The afternoon stretched golden and perfect around them, the kind of day that would live in memory long after the details faded. They talked until the shadows grew long and Yates finally, reluctantly, said they should head back before Beatrice sent out a search party. The ride back to town seemed shorter, Amelia more confident in the saddle now, even managing a gentle trot that made her laugh out loud with delight. When they reached the boarding house, Yates helped her down and held her hands in his. Can I see you again next Sunday? I'd like that very much. He kissed her again, sweet and brief, then swung back onto Copper. Dream of me, he called as he rode away, and she stood on the porch long after he disappeared, touching her lips and smiling. Inside, Beatrice was setting the table for supper and didn't look up when Amelia entered. You've got color in your cheeks, she observed. About time. That night, Lying in her narrow bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Amelia felt the grief that had been her constant companion for 3 months settle into something gentler, something she could carry without being crushed beneath its weight. Thomas would always be part of her, but Yates was right. Her story didn't have to end with loss. She pulled Thomas's pocket watch from the dresser and held it in the darkness, listening to its steady tick. "Thank you," she whispered to the ghost of her husband, to the life they'd had, brief and imperfect as it was. "Thank you for being kind to me, but I need to let you go now." She set the watch back on the dresser and turned to face the window, where the stars hung thick and bright over the Wyoming night, exactly as Yates had described them. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, but it would also bring new possibilities. And for the first time since Thomas had died, she found herself looking forward to what came next. The next Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Amelia moved through her days in a state of barely contained anticipation, catching herself humming while she worked, smiling at nothing in particular, daydreaming when she should have been focused on her tasks. Beatrice noticed, of course, but said nothing, merely watching her cousin with something that might have been approval in her sharp eyes. Miss Hollis agreed enthusiastically to give Amelia piano lessons, and they began meeting at the church twice a week after supper. The school teacher was delighted to have a student and patient with Amelia's fumbling attempts to make her fingers cooperate with the sheet music. The piano was slightly out of tune and the church was drafty, but Amelia loved every moment of it, loved learning something purely for her own enjoyment, not because it was expected or necessary. When Sunday finally arrived, Yates was waiting outside the boarding house with both horses, his face lighting up when he saw her. They rode out to a different location this time, a high meadow where wildflowers still bloomed in defiance of the approaching autumn, painting the grass in splashes of yellow and purple and white. This became their pattern. Every Sunday, weather permitting, they would ride out into the country, exploring new corners of the vast landscape, talking for hours, learning each other in increments. Yates taught her to recognize animal tracks in the dirt, to read the sky for signs of changing weather, to move quietly enough to spot deer grazing in the early morning light. In turn, she told him stories from the books she'd read, recited poetry she'd memorized as a girl, shared her slowly crystallizing dreams for the future. They kissed often, those kisses growing gradually longer, deeper, more urgent as the weeks passed. But Yates never pushed for more than she was ready to give, even though she could feel the wanting in the tension of his muscles when he held her, see it in the way his eyes darkened when she smiled at him. "I want to do this right," he told her one afternoon in late September as they sat by a different creek, her head resting against his shoulder. "I want to court you properly. I want everyone in town to know my intentions are honorable." "And what are your intentions?" she asked, even though she thought she knew. "To marry you if you'll have me." He turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Amelia. You're what I've been searching for without even knowing I was looking. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe in the future." Her heart swelled so large she thought it might burst through her chest. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet. Not until enough time has passed that you can say yes without guilt, without wondering if you're dishonoring Thomas's memory." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "But I'm telling you my intentions so you know where this is going, so you can decide if it's what you want too." "It is," she said softly. "It absolutely is. But you're right, I need more time. Not because I don't love you, I do, Yates. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. But because I need to feel right about it in my heart without any shadows. Then I'll wait." 6 months, a year, however long it takes. He kissed her temple. You're worth waiting for. As autumn painted the cottonwoods gold and crimson, Yates began appearing in town more frequently than just Sundays. He would stop by the boarding house with small gifts, a handful of late wildflowers, a perfectly shaped stone from the creek, a jar of honey from a ranch hand who kept bees. He helped Beatrice repair a broken step on the back porch and refused payment beyond a good meal. He attended church services on Sunday mornings so he could sit in the same pew as Amelia, their shoulders just barely touching, a secret only they fully understood. The town noticed, of course. Sheridan was too small for anything to go unnoticed for long. Amelia heard the whispers, saw the sidelong glances, knew that some people thought it was shameful how quickly she'd moved on from her husband's death. But there were just as many who approved, who thought it was practical for a young widow to secure a new future while she still had the chance. Beatrice was firmly in the latter camp. "That Yates is a good man," she told Amelia one evening as they washed the supper dishes together. "Works hard, doesn't drink to excess, treats you with respect. You could do a lot worse and probably won't do much better. If he asks you to marry him, you'd be a fool to say no. And what about mourning customs? Propriety? Propriety is a luxury for rich women in cities who can afford to spend years draped in black. Out here, life's too hard and too short for such nonsense. Besides, you said yourself you weren't deeply in love with your first husband. No point mourning longer than your heart requires just because some etiquette book says you should." The first snow came in early October, dusting the mountains white and sending a chill through the valley that promised harder weather to come. The ranch where Yates worked would soon move to winter quarters, and he warned Amelia that he wouldn't be able to come to town as often once the deep snows arrived. "The winter work is constant," he explained as they sat bundled against the cold on the boarding house porch, the only place they could have semi-private conversations. "Feeding cattle, breaking ice on water holes, rescuing stranded animals. I'll come when I can, but it might be weeks between visits sometimes." "I'll miss you," she said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. He had become essential to her happiness, as necessary as air and water. "I'll miss you too, but spring always comes, and when it does." He trailed off, pulling a small wooden box from his coat pocket. "I want you to have this, not as an engagement gift, not yet, but as a promise that I'm thinking of you every day, no matter how long between when I can see you." Inside the box was a delicate silver chain with a small pendant, a simple heart etched with tiny flowers. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, and tears blurred her vision as he fastened it around her neck. "Yates, it's too much. It's not nearly enough. But it'll do until I can give you a proper ring." He kissed her, his lips cold from the winter air but his breath warm against her skin. "Stay strong through the winter, Amelia. Come spring, I'm going to ask you to be my wife, and I hope with everything I have that you'll say yes." "You know I will," she whispered against his mouth. The winter that followed was the longest of Amelia's life. True to his word, Yates could only make it to town a handful of times between October and March, and then only for brief visits when the weather permitted and the ranch work allowed. She lived for those visits, counting the days between them, cherishing every word in the 3 letters he managed to send through the irregular winter mail. The boarding house became her sanctuary and her prison. Beatrice kept her busy enough that the days passed, but the evenings seemed endless, the winter dark pressing against the windows like a living thing. She practiced her piano with fierce dedication, finding solace in the music. She read every book she could borrow from the other boarders and the town's small lending library. She learned to knit from Miss Holly's and produced a series of increasingly competent scarves, and she thought about Yates. Missed him with an ache that was entirely different from the grief of losing Thomas. That had been loss, pure and simple, the amputation of a future she'd expected to have. This was longing, the yearning for something she'd chosen, something that was hers not by default or expectation, but by active desire. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled around the boarding house and frost painted intricate patterns on the windows, she would hold the pendant he'd given her and imagine spring. Imagined him riding back into town with the thaw, imagined saying yes to his proposal, imagined building a life together that was wholly their own. The winter broke in late March with a suddenness that seemed miraculous after months of snow and ice. The sun grew warmer. The snow began to melt in rushing streams down every street and gully, and the first brave shoots of green appeared in the muddy earth. Amelia stood on the boarding house porch one morning, feeling the sun on her face, and knew without question that her morning was over. She had carried Thomas's memory through the darkness, but now it was time to step fully into the light. When Yates finally rode into town on a Sunday morning in early April, she was waiting for him. He swung down from Copper before the horse had fully stopped, and she ran to him without caring who saw, throwing her arms around his neck as he lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle. "I missed you," he said fiercely. "Every single day. I missed you too. But Yates, I need to tell you something." He set her down, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Ask me. Ask me now." Understanding dawned slowly, followed by joy so pure it transformed his entire face. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the muddy street, taking her hand in his. Several passers-by stopped to watch, and Amelia didn't care at all. "Amelia Zimmerman," he said, his voice carrying clear and strong, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? I don't have much to offer except hard work and a heart that's completely yours, but I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He stood and kissed her in front of half the town, a kiss that held all the longing of their winter apart, all the promise of the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart to a smattering of applause from the gathered onlookers, Yates was grinning like a madman. "I need to do this properly," he said. "Come with me." He led her to the general store, where Mr. Patterson kept a small selection of jewelry behind the counter. The rings were simple, nothing fancy, but Yates chose one with a small garnet stone that caught the light like captured fire. It fit perfectly on her finger, as if it had been made for her. They were married 6 weeks later, in late May, when the wildflowers painted the valleys, and the snow had finally retreated from all but the highest peaks. The ceremony took place in the church, where Amelia had learned to play piano, with Reverend Michaels officiating and what seemed like half of Sheridan in attendance. Beatrice stood up with Amelia, stern-faced but suspiciously misty-eyed, while one of Yates's fellow ranch hands served as his best man. Amelia wore a dress that Miss Hollis and Beatrice had worked on together in secret, cream-colored silk with tiny buttons down the back and lace at the collar and cuffs. She wore wildflowers in her hair and Yates's pendant around her neck, and felt more beautiful than she ever had in her life. When Yates saw her walking down the aisle, his expression made her feel like the only woman in the entire world. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor and cherish through whatever the future brought. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, and told Yates he could kiss his bride, the kiss was tender and sweet and full of joyful promise. The reception was held at the boarding house, where Beatrice had outdone herself with the food. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, 3 different pies, and a cake that Miss Hollies had made and decorated with careful precision. The parlor furniture had been pushed back to make room for dancing, and someone had brought a fiddle, and the music and laughter filled the house until late into the evening. Yates danced with Amelia until her feet ached, then danced with her some more, unable to stop touching her, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real, that this was happening. When she finally begged for a rest, he brought her punch and hovered nearby, intercepting other men who tried to claim her for a dance, making her laugh at his transparent jealousy. "She's my wife now," he told anyone who would listen, pride evident in every word. "My wife." As the party finally began to wind down and guests started making their way home, Yates swept Amelia up into his arms despite her protests, and carried her up the stairs to the room she'd occupied for the past 9 months. Beatrice had moved out Amelia's few belongings earlier, and the room had been transformed with fresh linens and more wildflowers in a pitcher on the dresser. It was only temporary. Yates had saved enough money to put a down payment on a small piece of land about 10 miles from Sheridan, right at the base of the foothills. Come autumn, after the cattle drive was complete and he received his full wages, they would start building their house. But for now, for the summer while he continued working at the Double R Ranch, Beatrice had offered them the room free of charge as a wedding gift. Yates set Amelia down carefully, his expression shifting from joyful to nervous. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I know this is your second marriage, but if you need time, if you're not ready," she silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it, all the love and desire and gratitude that this man had brought back into her life. "I'm ready," she whispered against his lips. "I'm more than ready." "I love you, Yates Zimmerman." "I love you too," he said, his hands gentle as he began working on the tiny buttons of her dress. "I'll love you until the day I die and probably long after that." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, and nothing like the dutiful coupling Amelia had experienced in her first marriage. Yates took his time, learning what made her gasp and sigh, telling her over and over how beautiful she was, how lucky he felt, how he couldn't believe his good fortune. And when they finally came together, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed, but had been searching for her entire life. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Yates tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, both of them too happy to sleep just yet. "Tell me about our house," she said drowsily. "The one we're going to build." "Nothing too fancy," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "2 rooms to start, maybe 3 if we can afford it, a good porch facing south to catch the sun, a barn big enough for horses and a milk cow, a well dug deep so the water stays cold even in summer, and maybe, eventually, a room for a nursery." She tilted her head to look up at him. "You want children, if you do. No pressure either way, but yes, I'd like a family. Always figured I'd have kids one day if I found the right woman." He kissed her forehead. "And I definitely found the right woman." "I want children too," she admitted. "Thomas and I tried, but it never happened. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me. Or maybe the timing just wasn't right. Maybe you were meant to have babies with me instead." He pulled her closer. "Either way, we'll figure it out together. We've got all the time in the world." They talked until the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, making plans and dreams, building their future in words before they would build it in wood and stone. And when they finally did fall asleep, wrapped around each other like 2 halves of the same whole, Amelia's last conscious thought was that she had never been happier. The summer passed in a golden blur of work and love and building toward their future. Yates continued working at the Double R Ranch, often gone for days at a time during the big cattle drive to market, but every moment they could steal together felt precious and perfect. Amelia continued helping Beatrice at the boarding house, saving every penny she could toward their land, their house, their life together. In the rare evenings when Yates was in town, they would walk the streets hand in hand, no longer caring about propriety or gossip, secure in their love and their vows. Sometimes they would ride out to the piece of land they'd purchased, walking the boundaries, planning where the house would sit, where they'd plant a garden, where the barn would go. Yates would point out features of the landscape, explaining how the slight rise would protect the house from winter winds, how the creek at the edge of their property would provide water for livestock, how the southern exposure was perfect for crops. "We'll build it ourselves," he told her, his arm around her shoulders as they stood watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Me and a few of the boys from the ranch who owe me favors. It won't be quick, but it'll be solid, built to last. How long do you think it will take?" "If we start in September, right after the cattle are sold, and if the weather holds, we might be able to move in by Christmas. It'll be rough at first, but we'll make it home." She leaned into him, content. Anywhere is home if you're there. In August, Amelia missed her monthly bleeding. She didn't say anything at first, not wanting to get Yates's hopes up in case it was just stress or change of routine or any of the dozen other reasons women sometimes skipped a cycle. But when September came and went with no change, and she found herself exhausted by mid-afternoon and queasy at the smell of frying bacon, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She'd wanted this, had dreamed of it during her marriage to Thomas, had given up hope when it never happened. But now, with Yates, their child was growing inside her. A baby born of love and choice and passionate nights that still made her blush to remember. She waited until Yates returned from the cattle drive, wind-burned and exhausted, but with a pocket full of wages that represented their future. He came straight to the boarding house, barely taking time to wash up before seeking her out, and she pulled him into the privacy of their room before he could greet anyone else. "I have news," she said, taking his hands in hers, suddenly nervous despite knowing how he would react. Good news or bad news? But he was already smiling as if he couldn't imagine anything truly bad happening while they were together. "Good news. At least I think it's good news. I hope it's good news." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant, Yates. We're going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, processing. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the boarding house and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around just like he had that day in the spring when she'd told him to propose. "A baby," he kept saying, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having a baby. Amelia, this is the best news, the very best news. You're happy then?" "Happy? I'm over the moon. I don't even have words." He set her down carefully, immediately concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard?" She laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. Beatrice already knows, by the way. She figured it out before I told her and has been hovering like a mother hen, making sure I don't lift anything heavy." "Good. That's good." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "Our baby, part of you and part of me. Due in late April or early May by my calculations. Then we need to get the house finished before then. I want our child born in our own home, not in a boarding house room." His expression turned determined. "Starting tomorrow, every spare moment goes to building. We can do this." And they did. Through September and October, and into November, Yates and 4 other men from the Double R Ranch worked on the house whenever they could spare time from their regular duties. The owner, Mr. Reynolds, even gave Yates reduced hours with the promise of making up the difference in spring, impressed by the young man's dedication to providing for his growing family. Amelia watched their home take shape board by board, nail by nail. The foundation went in first, solid stone that Yates and his friends hauled from the creek bed. Then the frame rose against the sky, and gradually walls appeared, and a roof, and windows that Yates had special ordered from a catalog, spending precious money to ensure his wife would have plenty of light. As her belly began to round with the baby, Amelia spent her energy preparing in other ways. She sewed tiny gowns from soft fabric that Beatrice helped her choose. She knitted blankets and booties. She collected everything they would need, creating lists and checking them obsessively, terrified she would forget something crucial. Beatrice watched all this activity with approval and occasionally offered advice based on her own experience raising a daughter. Labor is hard work, but women have been doing it forever. Trust your body. It knows what to do. Miss Hollis threw Amelia a small party at the boarding house, inviting the respectable women of Sheridan to shower the expectant mother with gifts and advice. They brought quilts and rattles and more knitted items, and shared birth stories that ranged from reassuring to absolutely terrifying. Through it all, Amelia smiled and thanked everyone, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that in a few months she would be responsible for another human being. They moved into their new house on the 1st of December, a week before the first major snowstorm of the season. It wasn't completely finished. The interior walls still needed painting, and several pieces of furniture remained on order, but it was weatherproof and warm, with a good stove and a solid roof and glass in all the windows. Yates carried her over the threshold despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking, then set her down in the middle of their main room and watched her anxiously for her reaction. "It's perfect," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Absolutely perfect." And it was. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with the stove at one end and a table with 2 chairs at the other. A door led to their bedroom, which held the bed Yates had built himself, a dresser, and a cradle waiting for its future occupant. The third, smaller room was storage for now, but they had plans to expand it into a proper second bedroom eventually. Best of all was the porch, exactly as Yates had promised, facing south with a view of the mountains and the valley below. Even in winter, it was beautiful, the snow-covered landscape stretching away in pure white silence, broken only by the dark line of the creek and the occasional deer or elk moving through the trees. "Our home," Yates said, coming to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist, his hands resting on her belly. "Our family." That night, they made love in their own bed in their own house on their own land, and Amelia felt the last shadows of her past finally release their hold. This was her life now, built on a foundation of love and hard work and hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The winter was hard, but they were prepared for it. Yates had stockpiled firewood and supplies, and they spent the long dark evenings talking and reading and planning for the spring. He carved wooden toys for the baby, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small details. She sewed and knitted, adding to the growing pile of baby things. As her belly grew larger, Yates became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more, refusing to let her do anything he deemed too strenuous. She found it both endearing and frustrating, but his concern came from such obvious love that she couldn't really complain. "You're the most precious thing in the world to me," he said one night as they lay in bed, his hand tracing the curve of her stomach. "You and this baby, I just want to keep you both safe." "We're safe," she assured him. Thanks to you, we have a warm house and plenty of food and everything we need. Stop worrying." But of course he didn't, and when her time came in late April, he was nearly frantic with worry. She woke in the pre-dawn darkness with a pain low in her back that quickly spread to her belly, and she knew immediately what it meant. "Yates," she said, shaking him awake. "It's time. The baby's coming." He was out of bed in an instant, pulling on clothes, already planning. "I'll ride to town, get the doctor, get Beatrice. There's no time for the doctor. It takes an hour to get to town and back. Send for Beatrice, she's delivered babies before." Another pain gripped her, stronger than the first, and she gripped the edge of the bed. "But Yates, you need to stay with me. I can't do this alone." She saw the fear flash across his face, but he nodded. "I'll have one of the ranch hands get Beatrice. I'm not leaving you." The next hours blurred into a haze of pain and effort and Yates's steady presence. He brought her water when she needed it, held her hand when the contractions came, never once flinched or turned away even when she could see his own fear. Beatrice arrived eventually, taking charge with her usual brisk efficiency, and between the two of them, they guided Amelia through the hardest work of her life. Their son was born just as the sun reached its zenith, sliding into the world with a healthy wail that made Yates laugh with relief and joy. Beatrice cleaned the baby efficiently, checked him over with practiced hands, then placed the squirming bundle into Amelia's exhausted arms. "A boy," Beatrice announced. "Good strong lungs and all his fingers and toes. You did well, girl." Amelia looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and wisps of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in a way she hadn't known was possible. He was beautiful. He was theirs. He was a miracle. Yates knelt beside the bed, his eyes bright with tears as he gently touched one tiny hand, marveling when the baby's fingers curled instinctively around his thumb. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to do my very best to be worthy of you." They named him William, after Yates's father, with the middle name Thomas, honoring Amelia's first husband. It felt right to acknowledge that Thomas had been part of her story, part of the path that led her to this moment, this family, this joy. Beatrice stayed for 3 days, helping Amelia learn to nurse the baby, showing her how to swaddle him properly, offering advice and reassurance when the new mother felt overwhelmed. Then she returned to town, satisfied that her cousin and the baby were thriving. The weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he needed constant care. Amelia had never been so tired in her life, but she'd also never been happier. Watching Yates with their son, seeing the gentle way he cradled the tiny body, hearing him sing lullabies in his rumbling voice, she fell in love with him all over again. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a new rhythm as a family. Yates worked the ranch during the day, but he was always home by evening, unwilling to miss a moment of his son's development. They marveled together at every milestone. William's first smile, the way he started tracking movement with his eyes, the adorable sounds he made that weren't quite words but felt like conversation. On Sundays, they would sometimes ride into Sheridan as a family, William bundled against Amelia's chest, to attend church and visit with Beatrice and show off how much their son had grown. The town had fully embraced them now, proud of the young couple who had worked so hard to build their life together. One Sunday in early summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset with William drowsing between them, Yates turned to Amelia with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about him, Thomas?" She considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest. "Sometimes. Less than I used to, but yes. He was part of my life, and I don't want to pretend he never existed, but when I think of him now, it doesn't hurt the way it did." I'm grateful for the kindness he showed me, and I hope wherever he is, he knows I'm happy. You think he'd approve of us? I think he'd want me to be loved and cared for, and you do both those things so well." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was carrying so much grief when I came here, Yates. It was all I could see, all I could feel. And somehow you helped me set it down. You gave me hope to carry instead." "You gave me hope too," he said quietly. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working and saving money with no real purpose beyond the next day. You made me want more, want better, want a future worth building." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, their son sleeping peacefully between them. And Amelia thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief and loss, the terrifying leap of faith to move west, the afternoon a cowboy had pulled her out of the path of a runaway horse and changed the course of her entire life. She wouldn't trade a single moment of it, not even the painful ones, because they had all been necessary to bring her here, to this porch, this family, this perfect peace. As the years passed, their family grew along with their ranch. William was joined by a daughter named Sarah when he was 2, and then another son, James, 2 years after that. The house expanded to accommodate them, sprouting new rooms as Yates and his friends worked through the summers to keep pace with their growing needs. The Double R Ranch eventually sold to a large cattle company, but by then, Yates had built up his own small herd and had enough land to make a living, modest but secure. It was hard work, backbreaking at times, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Amelia learned to be a ranch wife, tending a large garden that fed her family through the harsh winters, raising chickens for eggs and meat, helping with the constant work that came with owning land. Her hands, which had once been soft from a life of relative ease in Illinois, became calloused and strong. But she never lost her love of music, and the piano that Yates surprised her with on their 5th anniversary became the heart of their home, filling the evenings with songs and laughter. Beatrice remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting often and serving as surrogate grandmother to their children. She taught Sarah to sew and bake, passed on her no-nonsense wisdom to the boys, and on quiet evenings would sit with Amelia on that south-facing porch and talk about life, about loss, about the unexpected ways joy finds us even in the darkest times. On their 10th anniversary, as they lay in bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Amelia traced the lines that had appeared at the corners of Yates's eyes, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair. He was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen, but more than that, he was still the kindest, the steadiest, the one who had taught her that love could be a choice made new every single day. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. Taking a chance on a grief-stricken widow who stepped off a stagecoach looking like she might shatter at any moment. Not for a single second. He caught her hand, kissing her palm. "You were never going to shatter, Amelia. You were too strong for that, even when you felt broken. I just helped you remember your own strength. You did more than that. You gave me a reason to be strong." She snuggled closer, fitting herself against him in the way that had become second nature over the years. "You gave me everything. A home, a family, a future I never dared to dream about. And you gave me purpose, gave me love, gave me 3 perfect children and a life that's richer than I ever imagined possible." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Thank you for saying yes that day in the street. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but hope to offer. You had more than hope. You had a good heart and strong hands and a dream worth building." She kissed him, slow and deep, still amazed after 10 years that she could feel this way about someone. "And you helped me carry my grief until I was strong enough to set it down and pick up hope instead. That's no small thing. They made love then, tender and familiar, the passion still there but seasoned now with deep knowledge of each other, with years of shared joy and struggle and growth. And afterward, falling asleep in each other's arms, Amelia offered up a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected paths life takes, for the healing power of love, for second chances and new beginnings. The children grew, as children do. William became tall and strong like his father, with the same steady calm and gentle way with animals. He learned ranching from Yates and music from Amelia, and developed into a young man any parent would be proud of. Sarah inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's work ethic, equally comfortable helping birth a calf or hosting a social at the ranch. James was the wild card, full of mischief and questions, always pushing boundaries but with such charm that it was impossible to stay angry at him for long. Through it all, Yates and Amelia remained partners in every sense of the word. They worked side by side, raised their children together, weathered droughts and hard winters and the thousand small crises that come with ranch life. They laughed together and sometimes argued, but they never went to bed angry, never let resentment fester, always chose each other first. On summer evenings, they would sit on their porch as they had that first night in their home, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and Yates would take Amelia's hand in his weathered one and just hold it, both of them content in the comfortable silence that comes from truly knowing another person. When William turned 18 and announced he wanted to buy land of his own, start his own ranch, Yates and Amelia helped him do it, proud of the man he'd become. When Sarah fell in love with the new doctor in Sheridan and married him in a ceremony at the ranch, they celebrated knowing she'd found the same kind of partnership they had. When James decided he wanted to go east to school to study engineering and see something of the world beyond Wyoming, they supported that too, even though it hurt to see him go. But through all these changes, their own bond remained constant. Yates still looked at Amelia as if she was the most beautiful woman in the world, even when her auburn hair turned gray and lines creased her face. She still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her, still found comfort in his steady presence, still marveled at how lucky she'd been to step off that stagecoach on a dusty afternoon so many years ago. On their 20th anniversary, their children surprised them with a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight. Beatrice, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. 20 years ago, she said, raising her glass, my cousin arrived in Sheridan carrying more grief than any young woman should have to bear. And a certain cowboy helped her carry hope instead. They built a life together, a family, a legacy that will endure for generations. So here's to Yates and Amelia, to the love that sustained them, and to the many more years they have ahead. As everyone drank and cheered, Yates pulled Amelia into his arms and danced with her in the middle of their living room, just as he had at their wedding, surrounded by everyone they loved. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the girl she'd been, so lost and afraid, convinced her life was over, she'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended with Thomas's death. It had transformed, reshaped itself into something she never could have imagined. The grief had become part of her, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she was defined by love, by family, by the choices she'd made to keep moving forward even when it seemed impossible. "What are you thinking about?" Yates murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "How far we've come, how grateful I am, how much I love you." "I love you too, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." It was something he said often, a promise and a truth. They danced until the musicians grew tired and the guests began to trickle away, and then they stood on their porch in the moonlight, arms around each other, and looked out at the land they'd built their life on. "No regrets?" Yates asked, as he sometimes did. "Not a single one," Amelia answered, as she always did, and it was true. The path that had brought her here had been hard, marked by loss and grief and fear. But it had also been marked by courage, by hope, by the willingness to try again even when her heart was broken. The widow who had carried grief had learned to carry hope instead, and that hope had blossomed into a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined. As the years continued to roll by, Yates and Amelia grew old together with a grace that spoke to the depth of their partnership. Their ranch thrived under their careful stewardship, becoming known throughout the region for its quality cattle and horses. More importantly, it became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where neighbors could always find help in times of trouble, and where young couples starting out would receive advice and encouragement from two people who had built something lasting from hope and hard work. Sarah and her husband, Dr. Matthew Peterson, gave them 3 grandchildren who spent their summers at the ranch, learning to ride and work alongside their grandfather. William married a rancher's daughter from the next county over and built his own successful operation, giving Yates and Amelia 4 more grandchildren. Even James, though he settled in Chicago as an engineer, made sure to visit every summer with his wife and their 2 children, wanting them to know their Wyoming roots. The house that had started as 2 rooms had grown into a sprawling homestead, with additions tacked on as needed, each one built by Yates's capable hands. The porch had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family gatherings, and Amelia's garden had become legendary, providing vegetables not just for their own family but for half the county. On their 30th anniversary, Yates planned a surprise. He'd been secretive for weeks, disappearing on mysterious errands that he refused to explain. When the day finally arrived, he blindfolded Amelia after breakfast and led her outside. "Yates Zimmerman, what on earth are you doing?" she laughed, clutching his arm for balance. "Just trust me." He guided her carefully across the yard and up several steps she didn't recognize, then removed the blindfold. She gasped. He'd built a new gazebo in the garden, white painted wood with a bench that wrapped around the inside and a roof to provide shade. But the most amazing thing was what hung from the ceiling. A delicate collection of wind chimes, dozens of them, creating a symphony of gentle sound in the summer breeze. "I wanted to give you something beautiful," he said softly, watching her face. "Something that would make you smile every time you saw it. You've spent 30 years making this ranch a home, making my life beautiful. This doesn't come close to repaying that, but it's a start." She turned to him with tears streaming down her face and kissed him with all the love and gratitude she felt. "It's perfect. You're perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "I'm the lucky one, Amelia. Every single day with you has been a gift." They spent the afternoon in the gazebo, talking about their life together, remembering the early days when everything was new and uncertain, marveling at how their family had grown, making plans for the years still ahead. The wind chimes sang overhead, and the garden bloomed around them, and it felt like a perfect summation of everything they'd built together. As evening approached, their children and grandchildren began arriving, having been secretly coordinating with Yates for weeks. There was another party, another celebration, but this one felt different, more reflective. Their children gave speeches about the example their parents had set, about the love that had sustained not just a marriage but an entire family. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 5 to 17, presented a quilt they'd all worked on together. each square representing a memory or moment from the ranch. Amelia cried happy tears as she examined each square. William's first horse, Sarah's wedding day, James leaving for school, dozens of summer gatherings and Christmas mornings and ordinary moments that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Yates and Amelia sat in their new gazebo under the stars, wrapped in the quilt their grandchildren had made. The wind chimes created a gentle music, and the night air was sweet with the scent of roses from the garden. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Amelia asked. "When you pulled me out of the way of that runaway horse? All the time. Best decision I ever made, grabbing you like that." He chuckled. "Though I was terrified I'd offended you, some proper lady from back east. And I was terrified you'd see how broken I was, how lost." She turned to look at him, this man she'd loved for 3 decades. "You saved me that day in more ways than just the horse. No, Amelia, you saved yourself. You were brave enough to come west, brave enough to try again, brave enough to say yes when I asked you to share your life with me. All I did was love you and try to be worthy of your choice. You've been more than worthy. You've been everything." She snuggled closer, fitting herself against him in the way that had become habit over 30 years. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I thought my life was over. I was just going through the motions, carrying all that grief, not sure what the point of going on was. And then there was you. And here we are," he finished softly. "And here we are," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, listening to the wind chimes and the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night. A coyote called somewhere on the hills, and an owl answered from the cottonwoods by the creek. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy and sorrow, witness to countless lives lived and lost. But on this particular patch of Wyoming earth, 2 people who had found each other against all odds sat together in perfect peace, their love a light that had illuminated 3 decades and showed no signs of dimming. Time continued its relentless march, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Beatrice passed away peacefully in her sleep at 83, and they buried her in the Sheridan cemetery with half the town in attendance. Amelia mourned her cousin genuinely, grateful for the lifeline she'd thrown when it was needed most, for the gruff kindness that had given her a fresh start. The ranch passed through lean years and prosperous ones, droughts that tested their reserves and seasons of plenty that allowed them to expand. Through it all, Yates and Amelia worked side by side, their partnership as strong in their 60s as it had been in their 20s, perhaps stronger for having weathered so many storms together. When Yates turned 65, he finally admitted that the physical work of ranching was getting harder. "I'm not as young as I used to be," he said ruefully, rubbing a shoulder that ached in cold weather. "Maybe it's time to let William take over more of the day-to-day operations." "We've earned some rest," Amelia agreed. "We can still help, still be part of things, but yes, it's time to let the next generation lead." So William officially took over the ranch, though Yates remained involved in decision-making, and was often found in the barn or riding the fence lines despite his children's protests that he should take it easy. Amelia, for her part, spent more time with her ever-growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to bake and garden and play the piano that still held pride of place in the living room. They traveled some, taking the train to visit James in Chicago and see the wonders of that great city. They went to San Francisco to see the ocean for the first time, standing hand in hand on the beach while waves crashed against the shore, marveling at the vastness of it. But they always came home to Wyoming, to their ranch, to the land that had witnessed their love story unfold, On their 40th anniversary, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony at the ranch, surrounded by their entire family. Yates, now 67 with silver hair and a weathered face that still made Amelia's heart skip, spoke his vows in a voice that trembled with emotion. 40 years ago, I promised to love and cherish you for the rest of my life. I've kept that promise every single day, and I intend to keep it for however many days we have left. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I love you more today than I ever thought possible. Amelia, 65 and still beautiful in the way of women who have been deeply loved, responded with her own vows. You taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. You showed me that hope is a choice, and love is a daily decision to show up for each other. Thank you for choosing me, for these 40 extraordinary years, and for every day still to come. They kissed to thunderous applause from 3 generations of family. And then they danced, slower than they once had, but with no less joy, while their grandchildren played music, and everyone celebrated the enduring power of love. As the sun set that evening, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and purple, Yates and Amelia found themselves once again on their porch, the same place they'd spent countless evenings over 4 decades. They were alone now, the party over, the family dispersed to their various homes and lives. 40 years, Amelia mused. How is that possible? It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once. Time's funny that way. The days go slow, but the years go fast. Yates squeezed her hand gently. Any regrets? She smiled at the familiar question. Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't meet you sooner, but then maybe we both needed to travel our own paths to be ready for each other when the time came. Maybe so. She rested her head on his shoulder, as she'd done thousands of times before. I came here carrying so much grief, Yates. If someone had told me that day when I stepped off the stagecoach that I would find a love like this, build a life like this, I wouldn't have believed them. But you did. We did. Because you helped me carry hope instead of grief. You made me believe in the future again. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with tears and love. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much. More, maybe. He cupped her face in his weathered hands, hands that had worked so hard for so many years to build their life. I love you, Amelia Zimmerman. I will love you until my last breath, and if there's anything beyond this life, I'll love you there too. And I love you, Yates Zimmerman. You are the best decision I ever made. They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, 2 people who had chosen each other 40 years ago and had kept choosing each other every day since. Behind them, their house stood solid and welcoming, filled with the memories of a life well lived. Around them, the land they'd worked and loved stretched away into the darkness, dotted with cattle and horses that bore their brand, evidence of their labor and legacy. In the years that followed, they continued to live fully, savoring each day as the gift it was. They welcomed more great-grandchildren into the world, marveling at the family tree that had grown from 2 people who'd found each other in a dusty frontier town. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered illnesses and losses, held each other through both joys and sorrows. When Yates turned 73, he had a mild heart attack that scared them all. But he recovered, stubborn and determined to squeeze every possible moment out of life. I'm not done yet, he told Amelia from his hospital bed, gripping her hand. We still have things to do, places to see, grandchildren to spoil. Then you'd better take care of yourself, she said firmly, though her eyes were wet with tears, because I'm not ready to let you go. He came home and, true to his word, slowed down. They spent their days in gentler pursuits, reading together on the porch, tending a smaller garden, taking short walks around the ranch that had been their life's work. They talked for hours, never running out of things to say, still finding new layers to each other after nearly 5 decades together. One evening in late spring, when Amelia was 74 and Yates was 76, they sat in the gazebo he'd built for their 30th anniversary. The wind chimes sang overhead, and the garden was ablaze with color, and the mountains stood eternal against the twilight sky. "I've been thinking," Yates said quietly, "about that first day I saw you. You had this look on your face, like you were determined to survive even though your heart was broken. You were the bravest thing I'd ever seen." "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Bravery and fear aren't opposites. You can be both at once." He smiled at her, that same warm smile that had captured her heart decades ago. "You're still the bravest person I know, Amelia." "And you're still the kindest," she replied. "The best man I've ever known." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars emerged, one by one, filling the sky with their ancient light. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful, and Amelia felt a deep sense of contentment settle in her bones. This was enough. This was more than enough. This was everything. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For pulling me out of the way of that runaway horse, for helping me carry hope instead of grief, for loving me so well for so long, for giving me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible." She turned to look at him, memorizing his face in the starlight. "For everything, Yates. Thank you for everything." He pulled her close, and they sat together under the stars. Two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had built a love that had sustained them through decades of joy and struggle, who had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The story that began with a widow carrying grief and a cowboy offering hope had become something neither of them could have imagined. A marriage that spanned nearly 50 years, a family that stretched across 3 generations, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. And as they sat together in their twilight years, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, they knew with certainty that they had succeeded in the most important task of all. They had loved well. They had loved deeply. They had loved with everything they had, and that love had made all the difference. The seasons continued to turn, and Yates and Amelia remained pillars of both their family and the community. The ranch thrived under William's management, and their other children found success and happiness in their own chosen paths. The grandchildren grew up strong and capable, carrying forward the values their grandparents had instilled. And the great-grandchildren, though too young to fully understand, would one day hear the story of how their family began with a widow who came west carrying grief and a cowboy who helped her carry hope instead. On a beautiful autumn day, just after their 50th anniversary, Yates and Amelia gathered the entire family at the ranch for what everyone assumed would be another celebration. But this time, Yates and Amelia had something different in mind. They stood together on the porch that had witnessed so many important moments in their lives, and Yates raised his hand for quiet. The assembled family, dozens of them now ranging from great-grandchildren to their own children who were grandparents themselves, fell silent. 50 years ago, Yates began, his voice still strong despite his years, I met a woman who changed my life. She was carrying more grief than anyone should have to bear, but she was also carrying something else, even if she didn't know it yet. She was carrying the strength to start again, the courage to hope, the capacity to love even when her heart had been broken. He turned to Amelia, taking her hands in his. You've given me the greatest 50 years any man could ask for. You've been my partner, my best friend, my love. You've made me better than I ever could have been alone. And I want everyone here to understand that the life we built, the family we raised, All of it came from a simple choice to help each other carry hope instead of grief. Amelia squeezed his hands, tears streaming down her face. "And I want all of you to know," she said, looking out at their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, "that love is always worth the risk. Even when you're scared, even when you've been hurt before, even when it seems impossible, love is worth choosing. Your grandfather taught me that, and it's the greatest lesson I can pass on to you." The family gathered around them then, 3 generations embracing, laughing, crying, celebrating the love that had created them all. And Yates and Amelia stood at the center of it, the foundation upon which this entire beautiful structure had been built, their hands still clasped together as they had been for 50 years. As the sun set on that autumn day, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant colors, Yates and Amelia found themselves alone again on their porch. Their family had finally departed, promising to visit again soon, leaving behind the comfortable quiet that 2 people who have spent a lifetime together treasure. 50 years, Amelia said softly. "Who would have thought?" "I would have," Yates replied. "From the moment you said yes in that muddy street, I knew we'd make it. I knew we'd build something that would last." "How did you know?" "Because I saw the same thing in you that you saw in me. Hope, determination, the willingness to try again even when it's scary." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "We were always going to make it, Amelia. We were always going to build something beautiful." She leaned against him, and they watched the sun disappear behind the mountains they'd looked at for 50 years, the mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. The ranch spread out before them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work. The house behind them echoed with 50 years of memories, of laughter and tears, of ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. "I would do it all again," Amelia said. "Every single moment, even the hard parts, because they led me here to this porch with you." "Me too," Yates agreed. "Every decision, every struggle, every joy, all of it, as long as it meant I ended up here with you." They sat together as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a love that would echo through generations. The widow who had come carrying grief had learned to carry hope instead, and that hope had blossomed into a life of extraordinary richness. And as night fell completely, wrapping them in velvet darkness spangled with stars, Yates and Amelia remained on their porch, hand in hand, heart to heart, still choosing each other just as they had every day for 50 years. Their love story, which had begun with a runaway horse on a dusty street in Sheridan, Wyoming, had become something timeless, something that would be told and retold in the family for generations to come. It was a story about grief and hope, about courage and love, about the unexpected ways life can surprise us when we're brave enough to take a chance. It was a story about building something that lasts, not just with our hands but with our hearts. It was a story about 2 people who had helped each other become their best selves, who had created a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and family and unwavering partnership. And it was a story with a perfect ending. 2 people growing old together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, still deeply in love after 50 years, still grateful for the day fate brought them together, still choosing hope over grief, love over fear, each other over everything else. As they finally rose from the porch to go inside, to the warm house they'd built together, to the bed they'd shared for half a century, Amelia paused to look back at the night sky one more time. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought her to Sheridan all those years ago. "Thank you for this life. Thank you for him. Thank you for teaching me that grief doesn't have to be the end, that hope is always possible, that love can bloom even in the most broken heart. Yates came to stand beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked up at the stars that had watched over their entire journey. "Ready?" he asked gently. "Ready," she confirmed. And hand in hand they walked into their home, into the warmth and comfort they'd spent 50 years creating, into the peaceful rest that came from living a life full of love and purpose and joy. Their story was complete, every thread tied off, every question answered, every promise kept. They had started with grief and hope. They had built a love that would last forever. And they had lived fully and completely, exactly the life they were meant to live. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything,